We live in a world which values history and holds on to it pretty well. Our entire calendar system has many days of remembrance, some of which are quite well known, as in the ones that happen in November. Some of them aren't so well known. For example, this Friday was Founders' Day, the anniversary of the Salvation Army, if you recognise that, and all of that. And when William Booth stood outside the Blind Beggar pub, or whatever pub he chose to stand outside of while Catherine was off preaching. So we've got all of these dates. Our entire calendar works around remembering. And this act of stopping to just take stock of what has happened is a very biblical practice. If you read the scriptures through Old Testament into the New Testament, there are constant times where people stopped and remembered. There was so much to do, yet they stopped and remembered. And quite often it can be quite helpful for us to do the same as well. We've been here 135 years. It's been said a lot during our time this morning. But I think we're at that point where a lot could happen in our future. God hasn't finished with us as a church here in this place. And actually, maybe it's time that we just stop and take stock of what has happened in our past. Over the last 135 years, we as a church have been serving God and the community for the glory of God alone. And we look back to celebrate the faithfulness of God, knowing that the God that has been faithful all through history is the same God with us today and the same God with us tomorrow. And that is something we can rejoice and celebrate in. But it's also a time where we look forward. We learn lessons from our past. And we see what happens as a result. Our Bible passage that I've just read for us speaks into a time where the people of Judah would have been looking back. A lot of them have just been taken from the city where their lives were. They were forcibly uprooted and taken to a new city. And they were living as captives again under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. They would have been looking back at their lives in Jerusalem, worshipping at the temple, and mourning it in a lot of ways. They would have missed it, but that world, that way of life, had completely ended for them. They were in a new place, in a new political system, in a new way of life. And the letter that Jeremiah sends, and the bit that we've read this morning, almost looks as if Jeremiah's just going and giving loads of bad news. Saying that essentially this exile will not end quickly. Which, if you've just been taken from somewhere and put somewhere else, to hear that you're going to be there for an awful long time is pretty saddening, really. I'd be quite upset hearing that. But in this despair, there are real seeds of hope. When you look for it, you can always find hope in this. And a lot of that would be because of the promises that God made to Abraham, where he said, your descendants will outnumber the stars in the sky, you cannot count them. And yet here, probably the smallest that God's people have ever been, God reminds them that they will grow in number. And that is a real source of hope. That they will not just disappear, but they will multiply, they will be fruitful, and God will do something great within their lives. They were told to settle, plant harvests, build homes, have descendants. God wasn't finished with them yet, even though everything that was going on at the time said otherwise. And I think that is sometimes can be how we live life now. We look at things and we go, all of this is happening. We look at it slightly pessimistically sometimes, all of us, or we might do, and say, okay, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And where can the hope be? But despite everything that may look as if not a source of hope, God isn't finished with us yet, because we are still here. And that is a real source of hope. We get through this letter and we get to verse 7. And this verse is a verse that struck Vicky and I the Christmas before we knew that we were coming here. We read it on the wall in the cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral in Liverpool. And it kind of stayed with us. And then when we realised that we were being sent to a city, it came back to our minds. And it stayed with us. But I need to say, this does not say that we're in exile here. I'm not saying, I'm taking this verse completely out of context, doing everything that college taught us not to do, I'm doing. And the pandemic happened, and, but hey, because Winchester is a really amazing place to live. And we've loved this year, and it's beautiful, there's so much going on, and it's great. So we take this verse out of context. So I read it again for us. Work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you. Pray to the Lord for its welfare will determine your welfare. And when we take this verse out of context, I think of it about this city where God has placed us, then I think we've got quite a good future. Our past is built on this motivation. Seeking the welfare of the city. We've been quite active in the past with helping those who are homeless, those who need support. We have been actively involved in a lot of things that a lot of other community groups now have started to do and got better funding, so we don't need to do that anymore. We can support them rather than do it ourselves. And that is quite a privileged place to be in. It means that we can look at this city and seek its welfare and meet some of the needs that aren't being met yet. And that is exciting. The post-COVID world that is emerging is going to be completely different to the world of the before times. For those of us who are seeking life as it used to be, is not going to be there because so much has changed. We only need to look at the headlines over the last year of the way the world has woken up to discrimination, that the world has woken up to so many things that are just wrong, and hopefully are doing something about it. And this world, we get to rewrite the narrative. We get to start again, seeking its welfare, writing God's love every day into the fabric of this society. And that is something to be excited about. Things may change. The way we do things may change. Yet our motivation does not change. If we look at the letter that Jeremiah sent to the exiles in Babylon, when we get to verse 13, we read probably one of the most hopeful verses within this. I argue that verse 13 is better than verse 11, which is often taken out of context and taken. But if you seek me wholeheartedly, you will find me, is what God says to the captives in Babylon. If we seek God, we will find God. And that is something that is just remarkable. We know that when we seek the face of God through the power of the resurrection of Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit living in us, we can find the face of God and live with God. And that is our hope. That is when we can transform and be real advocates for the kingdom in this place. Are you willing to seek God? In everything you do, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, are you doing what you can to seek the face of God? Or are you letting other narratives be written within your life? I know, preaching to myself as well here, I know that I fail in this. And by the grace of God, I get to stand up and try again when I let another narrative come in. But fortunately, God is the God who loves to forgive and be graceful. Because he's shown it in the past, and we know that the God of yesterday is the same today and forever. So as we go forward into the future, seeking the welfare of the city we find ourselves in, are you willing to seek the face of God? And when you find God after your seeking, are you willing to cling to him? Letting nothing else rip you away from the cross, which gives us life. Because as history goes on, the cross stands still as the world revolves. Things may change, but our motivation of Jesus doesn't. Are we willing to seek this Jesus who rose again and live our lives clinging to his cross?